So, as I've mentioned before, I'm a bartender. I started bartending about a year and a half ago, but I've worked in the service industry for 8 years, off and on. I've done a couple other things. I've worked in a bank and a grocery store. But I always gravitate back to the service industry for a myriad of reasons. This is not a video about those reasons. This is a video about things that make me want to storm out of a shift and never come back. Things that make me question my life and my choices, and things that make me contemplate suicide. To get to the heart of the matter, we have to go back to 1938 and the legal implementation of the tipped minimum wage. For those of you who don't know, the tipped minimum wage law allows employers to pay employees in a service position less than the federal minimum wage if they receive at least $30 in tips a month, and as long as their wage plus their tips equal the minimum wage. That last part can be somewhat problematic, but we'll get back to that later. As I'm working on this, it's getting to be quite long, the script that is, so I have not decided if I am going to leave it as one very long piece or if I'm going to split it up into multiple videos. I guess we'll find out together. Anyway, now, the Great Depression obviously had drastic effects on several industries. I would imagine every industry, but food service was perhaps one of the most negatively affected, not in the sense that the industry died, because it didn't, but the long-lasting state of the industry is the same one formed in the Depression. You see, most of the people working in the service industry were, and still are, women, people of color, and immigrants. Restaurants realized that some of these people really weren't having to be paid before. Restaurant owners realized they could still bring in business by cutting their prices, sometimes drastically, and yeah, that was probably what was best for the community at the time. I am all in favor of cheaper food, affordable food for people, but to think of it from a capitalist perspective, and restaurant owners are capitalists, they just agreed to lose money. Or so it would seem. You see, they realized they could get away with cutting prices without losing money if they advocated that when the minimum wage was implemented. They could pay their employees a tipped wage and encourage tipping from customers. Tipping had been popularized in American culture in the late 1860s after formerly enslaved people were hired into porter positions, service industry job positions, but their employers refused to put them on the payroll. And they encouraged the customers to pay them with tips for their service. So then we get to 1938, and FDR says, no, you got to pay them at least something. But it doesn't have to be the whole thing we're giving everybody else. I mean, they're people of color and women and immigrants. So then in 1966, the first base wage was implemented, stating that tips could count towards 50% of the federal minimum wage. Now, under that system, the employer has to pay 50% of the federal minimum wage, and then the other tips count for 50%, and then the rest is all extra on top. That's not really the way that it works now. I mean, yes, a lot of us are making extra money over minimum wage, but we'll come back to that. So in 1991, the tipped wage was $2.13 an hour, which at that time was 50% of the $4.25 minimum wage. And then in 1996, liberal darling Bill Clinton passed into legislation provisions which capped the tipped minimum wage at $2.13 for posterity. And servers never got a raise. The restaurant industry won't do that on its own. It's been 24 years since servers had a raise. If the service industry minimum wage were adjusted for inflation, it would be $4.17 an hour. If we kept with the metric of 50% of the minimum wage, it would be $3.63 an hour, which still isn't a whole lot, but it is more, almost twice as more. Now, I'm pointing all of this out because, well, yeah, it sucks and we should definitely change it, but mostly because when we get into some of the stories that we're about to get into, I need you to realize and remember that the majority, not all, but the majority of the workers in these stories are being paid $2.13 an hour. With the expectation of tips, yes. But, as a note, you can work a 5-hour shift, have 3 tables all night, and all 3 of them stiff you. That means that they didn't leave a tip. It's not sexual. Anyway, another legal point to note is that current interpretations of the Fair Labor Standards Act state that servers or tipped wage earners may complete non-tipped duties or dual jobs if they're related to the tipped job. So like short order cooks who may also provide counter service, or gauchos at churrascarias or Brazilian steakhouses who cook meat but then serve them directly to the table. However, these positions typically earn around $5 an hour, somewhere in that range, while servers and sometimes bartenders earn $2.13 an hour. Some places pay their bartenders $4, $5 an hour. But yes, so minimum wage earners who earn $2.13 an hour can only spend 20% of their shift work not directly working with customers. This means that for a 5-hour shift, a server's side work, cleaning, preparing salads, etc., things that are not directly related to serving a table of customers, cannot exceed 1 hour unless you're getting paid $7.25 for that hour. On an hour-by-hour basis, the breakdown is 12 minutes per every hour. Darden, one of the U.S.'s largest restaurant empires. You may not be familiar with the Darden name, but you are familiar with their restaurants. Olive Garden, which will be one of the ones we're discussing. Red Lobster used to be a Darden restaurant, it's not anymore. Seasons 52 is a Darden restaurant. There's another one, like some kind of burger joint. I don't know. Anyway, point being, they got hella restaurants, hella employees all over the country. They have paid lawsuit after lawsuit over unpaid wages, underpaid wages, or other labor violations. In 2011, 2 separate Darden restaurants in Texas paid out $25,000 and $27,000 in back pay to employees. To help protect themselves from future lawsuits, Olive Garden, which had a class action lawsuit filed against it, created new positions and eliminated end of shift side work for servers completely. Because servers were spending so much of their time after shift, we're talking 2 to 3 to sometimes 4 hours after their shift, polishing silverware, rolling silverware, polishing glasses, cleaning, etc. And for those hours, they were only being compensated $2.13. They no longer had the ability to earn tips during those wages. So even though while they were earning tips, they may have earned more than the minimum wage, the issue is that at a certain point you stop having the ability to earn tips because your restaurant is closed. No more tables can come in. So yeah, they weren't going to allow the servers to clock out and clock back in at 7:25, which for those of you who have never opened up a restaurant or worked in a tip wage position, typically when you come in at the beginning of the shift, you clock in as some sort of training or prep position, and the wage you are earning is $7.25 an hour. And then once the restaurant opens and you begin having the ability to earn tips, you clock out and you clock back in as server or bartender at your tipped wage. But at the end of the shift, when the restaurant closes, they do not allow you to clock out of your tipped wage and clock back in at an hourly wage. So there's this restaurant which is currently open and operating during the COVID-19 pandemic, with employees wearing masks and gloves the entire shift. There's an open fire pit in the restaurant, and the air conditioning doesn't work. it hasn't worked properly in about the 6 years-ish the restaurant has been open, and every summer guests and employees complain, and it never gets fixed. The average temperature in this restaurant on a summer day is 97 degrees Fahrenheit, with temperatures reaching 103 degrees Fahrenheit inside the restaurant. OSHA recommends that employers keep workspaces at about 68 to 76 degrees Fahrenheit. Like, welcome to literal hell. They're honestly lucky that no one has had a heat stroke or passed out or gotten seriously sick or hurt because of the heat. There's a restaurant where employees were regularly asked to stay and perform managerial duties, including locking up the restaurant and sometimes doing paperwork. And they were paid anywhere from $2.13 an hour to $8 an hour, with the promise of like an extra $20 cash out of the register at the end of the night. This same owner would regularly schedule himself and only one other employee and then not show up at a restaurant that did dine-in, carry-out, and delivery. So he would have one person scheduled to cook and do dishes and serve tables and answer phones and deliver somehow. Paychecks would regularly bounce, or they would be distributed with instructions not to cash them until such and such day, whenever he said was okay, or he thought there would be enough money in the bank account, which is illegal. And not to mention the verbal abuse. This man yelled at literal high school children, berating them, calling them stupid, lazy, all sorts of names. If they had the audacity to step away from the hot kitchen for a moment to get a drink, or if they, God forbid, made a mistake, because, you know, kids should never make mistakes, or if they had the audacity to take a break. He once called a pregnant employee a bitch when she simply pointed out that he should ensure that his closing crew are cleaning and prepping appropriately for the morning shift, because the evening crew left the morning shift extremely underprepared for a large order first thing at opening. He called an employee that he basically forced to take on managerial duties selfish, when that employee asked to be compensated for the managerial duties they were performing. Just as a whole, a common theme is that female employees are propositioned for sex, pressured into sex, or downright assaulted. And if the guy is fired, it's usually over something unrelated. Like they were late too many times, and sometimes the person harassing you is the manager. And even when you transfer locations several towns away, they pull up your employee records and get your phone number and text you. At a particular restaurant, a kitchen manager witnessed a GM, general manager, corner a line cook that the manager did not like and yell expletives in his face, goading him to attempt to get him to hit her. And even though he didn't, the GM still ordered that the kitchen manager fire this line cook, and threatened to fire the kitchen manager if they did not. fire the employee. Restaurants as a whole, though, are notorious for not actually firing employees, particularly if they don't have just cause. If they just don't like you for whatever reason, they will stop scheduling you. They'll put your name on the schedule, but they won't put any shifts in there. Or they'll send you home one day and tell you that they'll call you and let you know when they need you to come back in, and then just not call. Restaurant managers professionally ghosting folks for decades. Restaurants regularly force employees to sign away their right to a break, and routinely make them work off the clock. Most often this is done to avoid overtime, or prefer them being considered full-time so they don't have to give them benefits. Again, with the AC, a lot of restaurants will leave AC in the back of the house broken, as long as it's comfortable for the guests out in the front of the house. Some restaurants don't care about either. It doesn't matter if their employees are vomiting. Service industry managers and retail managers actually will yell at you, demean you, and write you up and fire you in front of customers. And oh, goddess, don't get me started on the racism and homophobia present in the service industry. We're talking employees being told all gay people should die. We're talking partners not being allowed to come to the restaurant because you're in a same-sex relationship or an interracial relationship. We're talking restaurants either not hiring people of color or being very strict about people of color's appearance. They will only hire people of color who look professional enough. And if you don't understand the coding and the racism implied with that, there are people of color, particularly women of color, who can speak on it a whole lot better than I am. Seek them out. It's atrocious. Now, I've personally worked a job where the manager would pay me cash to avoid me hitting 40 hours a week, and having to pay me overtime. I also worked an hour to an hour and a half off the clock every morning because, are you ready? My manager insisted on scheduling me only 30 minutes before we opened every shift, and told me that if I wanted or needed more time to set up the bar, that was on me. Now, whether or not 30 minutes is enough time to set up a bar greatly depends on the shift, the restaurant, the circumstances. At this particular restaurant, in these 30 minutes, I was expected to bring all of the liquor out from the cooler, which, because we stored it in the cooler, and put it in the well. I had to fill up the ice well. I had to often put away delivery trucks. Some days we got in shipments of beer, other days we got in shipments of liquor, other days we got in shipments of juices or fruits. I had to cut fruits. I had to cut lime wedges, lemon wedges, orange wedges and wheels. I had to portion out 2-pound bags of blueberries, blackberries, and strawberries into 4-ounce portion cups. And it's true, some days I was able to do some of these shifts, complete some of these tasks during my shift because I was not busy the entire shift. But the thing about the service industry is you never really know how busy it's going to be, so you never really know if you're going to have time to complete these tasks during your shift. I had to set up menus at all 18 seats at the bar, and I often had to wipe down the bar first because the evening bartender didn't do it. I often had to do a couple loads of dishes because the evening bartender left dirty dishes. I hope I've made my point. If you have no concept of how much time these tasks can take individually, depending on how much fruit you have to cut, what shift it is, cutting fruit can take anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes to 30 minutes by itself. Portioning the berries could take anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. If you're uninterrupted. So, yeah. And then on top of that, once the shift started, I was responsible for obviously making drinks for the servers' tables. I had 18 seats at my bar. I had a 5-table section. Sometimes I would put my foot down and refuse to take a section if it were too busy. If it was too busy. But I often had to take and box up to-go orders and make salads for them. Any of my guests who ordered salads, I typically had to make the salads. We only really had a person in the kitchen assigned to make salads on Friday and Saturday nights. And granted, my section wasn't always full, my bar wasn't always full, we weren't always busy. But everything being full was the case often enough for me to be fairly stressed out. So the icing on the cake with that job was actually that the company went bankrupt and got bought out. I need some tea for my throat. Hold on. Okay. So the company went bankrupt and got bought out. And when the company was bought out, current employees were told that we were going to be grandfathered in at our current wages, but going forward, all front of house employees hired were going to be paid $2.13 an hour. Now, hosts, I think at that time were making like $5 something an hour plus the percentage of tip out. I, as the bartender, was making $4.23 an hour, I think, plus 3% of alcohol sales. And so when this new company took over, without notice, I got my direct deposit, and it was half of what it normally was. They had cut my pay to $2.13 an hour after I was told it would not be cut, which is breach of contract. It's a federal wage violation. Another thing restaurant owners love to do is force employees to financially cover the cost of walkouts, cash drawer shortages, uniform costs, and charge breakage fees, assuming that every server will break a glass or plate or dishes somehow. A lot of servers don't see a check at all because our taxes get taken out of our $2.13 an hour wage. This really doesn't help. So all of these charges could potentially violate the FLSA because it says where deductions for walkouts, breakage, or cash drawer shortages reduce the employee's wage below the minimum wage, such deductions are illegal. Now, obviously, this depends on the amount in question and each individual's tips and wages. It depends on how much the bill was. Like, did your table walk out on a $400 bill and you only made $100 in tips? That would definitely reduce you below minimum wage. They can't force you to cover that. Was it $20? It's a little more iffy. So you can see how allowing this at all can lead to a host of issues. I've had acquaintances who worked in places where not only did they tip pool is fairly common, tip share, tip out's fairly common. No. Oh no. They shared their tip pools with the managers and owners, which is super illegal, my dudes. That actually entitles them, I'm not sure if they know this, I should probably inform them, that entitles them to $7.25 for every hour that they worked, and reimbursement of the amount of tips improperly utilized by their employers. Now you might say, Salty Valk, this all sounds super fucked up. Like, why do y'all put up with this? And I'm gonna give you 3 big reasons. Number 1, the money is actually pretty good, pretty okay. And the flexibility the job offers makes it very appealing. And a lot of servers are afraid of that changing, and that has a lot to do with number 2. Tipped wage earners and other hourly restaurant employees are some of the most vulnerable people, both socially and economically. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of people in the restaurant industry are women. A lot of them are single mothers. A lot of them are people of color, and a lot of them are immigrants, and undocumented immigrants. So shaking things up and demanding things change can be frightening. And number 3, union membership in the service industry is the second lowest membership rate in the country, with 3.5% of service industry and food preparation employees unionized, only outdone by farming, fishing, and forestry at 2.8%. However, that 3.5% also includes fast food workers, deli workers, things like that. For food service and drinking places, restaurants, and bars, we were dead last, y'all. In 2019, union membership was 1.4%. Non-union workers, on top of being more susceptible to labor violations, earn 81% of the wages of union employees. Back to number 1, and the money being good. The average hourly wage of restaurant employees in non-supervisory positions is $13.64 an hour, which is less than half the national average of $29.37 per hour. That's true, but for a job which requires no education, no or very little experience, and a job which often hires, felons. This is nearly double the wage of other minimum wage prospects. I was a little surprised at how low it was, but I guess that is a little bit of my privilege showing. Most of my restaurant jobs, with the exception of about 3, have been in casual upscale dining, not quite fine dining. But I have worked in a few turn and burn places. But yeah, a lot of servers are making $20 an hour on an okay night, and $50 an hour on great nights. But this is looking at shifts individually, and looking at the shifts individually hides that your employer is pulling wages from those great nights to compensate for the shifts earlier in the week when you only average $3 to $5 an hour. Your hourly average for that night has actually gone down, but you don't quite realize it. In turn and burn, though, it's a lot more noticeable, and it can be more insidious, because tipped wages are not compensated on an hourly or shift basis. They are averaged together over the course of a pay period. So this means that, for instance, if your pay period is 2 weeks, your payroll will take all of your tips earned and then average it out for how many hours you worked. And as long as that number is minimum wage or higher, then they don't have to compensate you for any hours. They don't look at it like, on Monday you worked 5 hours and you only averaged $5 an hour, so we have to pay you $2.25. No, they don't do that. Now, a lot of servers are very against raising our wages because they fear people will stop tipping at all, which is, it's just demonstrably not true, y'all. It just isn't. If you don't believe me, go online, find server groups and ask servers in California or Minnesota or Oregon if they no longer get tipped. All of these states require that their servers be paid the state minimum wage, which in a lot of these places is 10, 11, 12, 13 something an hour. So it's not impossible. Number 2, a little expansion here. Not only are single mothers and people of color often more financially vulnerable, single mothers are often threatened with the state violence of DHR if they are not a model citizen. So if they do things like strike or participate in, community organization against labor violations, people of color are obviously more likely to get fired, more likely to get arrested when participating in public demonstrations against their employers, and immigrants face deportation. So there are a lot of reasons that it is difficult for service industry employees to advocate for change in the industry. I myself am probably honestly risking being blackballed in the industry that I love and care about so much. But I just want it to be better. I am tired of seeing my poor and vulnerable coworkers shit on and made to feel like they don't have a choice. There's nothing they can do to change it. And then back to number 3. I am considering reaching out to some organizations because I would really like to try and unionize the industry in my area, but it's scary and it's dangerous, and COVID presents a different set of risks and obstacles, in that it's kind of hard to just go out. It's not really safe to go out and, go to bars and try to talk to other service industry employees. So if anyone has any input, any ideas, any helpful tools or resources, I would be down, because we need some help, y'all. So I think that it is definitely necessary for servers to work together and unionize. If you are in the service industry and you care about class solidarity, you are a leftist, you are someone who supports unions, someone who supports raising wages and ensuring that you have a right to a break, which is a federally protected right. I can't tell you how many bosses I've had say, you work in Alabama, and Alabama doesn't require me to give you a break. If you care about this, be careful with the language that you use, but you need to start talking to your coworkers. We need to start talking to each other. We need to start finding each other. And we have got to do something, because particularly with this pandemic, it has become clear that they don't care about our safety or whether or not we make enough money to survive. They're out here, they've got us out here in masks and gloves, risking getting a deadly disease, so that we can sell people steaks and shit, and they're still paying us $2.13 an hour, even though we can only serve half the number of guests we were able to serve before. So yeah. And if you are a leftist, and you care about really impacting marginalized communities, I would encourage you to get to know people in the service industry if you're not in the service industry yourself, and try and encourage them to unionize. Try and encourage them to come together, and it definitely has to be done carefully, because obviously any sort of attention on businesses where undocumented immigrants are employed at high numbers You obviously run the risk of vindictive employers calling ICE, and things like that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to safely build solidarity between service industry workers. The industry has fostered a cutthroat, I got mine attitude for a very long time. But then they feed you bullshit like teamwork makes dream work. But don't talk about your tips. Don't tell anyone how much money you're making. I've also had employers threaten to fire me for talking about how much money I was being paid, which is illegal. You have a federally protected right to discuss your wages. Anyway, yeah, I will see y'all next time. Give them hell, bitches. Okay, I'm not all dressed up. I'm sorry. This is how you get me. I just worked a really hard shift. But just a little update on one of the stories that I mentioned. The restaurant where the AC does not work, and it was 103 in the restaurant. The new management is currently working very hard to get that fixed. They have put portable temporary ACs throughout the restaurant. We have 4 in the restaurant, 1 in the back and 3 out front. So they are working on it. I just thought that I should give credit where credit is due, if I'm shitting all over restaurants. So yeah, hopefully that will be fixed in the next couple of weeks.